I'm from the Hague. Yes. Otherwise you would be German if you can't pronounce it properly. No, we don't want to try to do that.
Your voice carries enough. Not for everybody.
No, not for everybody, not too bad.
Well, it's not the friction.
Into the road. Yeah.
I couldn't help noticing that the entire Cape Colony was a desolate place, seemingly totally uninhabited. This is an excerpt from a letter of 18-year-old Suffolk Regiment Private Potter. It was really Sir Potter. We happened upon about 12 or 13 such letters. This one was written in December 1899. I know I'm running 200 years ahead of where we should be. Private Potter, amongst others, said, I'll get to this on Saturday. On Saturday we're going to do some more untold stories of the Anglo-Boer War. But this is a nice connection in terms of the population of South Africa, 1899, ranging back to the 1700s. It was not ever, not even hundreds of years before then, a desolate place. Everywhere, and he was everywhere. Coenraad de Buys went, he encountered people. He interacted with South Africans in the early 1700s. And I'm now using the terminology we discussed yesterday. Everywhere he went, he found Bushmen. They'd been living there for hundreds, thousands of years. Their descendants he encountered. Everywhere he went, he encountered the Khoi, the Khoi people. Given the signs of the times, and in a sense it's still very much the case today, it was certainly the case in the Anglo-Boer War. Reading the diaries, studying the records of the times of Coenraad de Buys, the Anglo-Boer War, or even later, there's an invisible sector of the population. Every little campaign, every activity that Coenraad engaged in, he mostly had other people with him. And every single time he had some Bushmen with him. to find the way, to path, to carry, to do odd jobs, and Coenraad people. When he went through the Free State, eventually up to what was Northern Transvaal, now Limpopo, he had Griqua people, Korana people, and still some of the Bushmen that came with him from the Eastern Cape. This, I think, says something about the dynamic of the times of even Coenraad de Buys. Everywhere he went, he interacted with people. And this interaction resulted in some kind of result. Some results being indelible in our history, but often unrecorded or unacknowledged. Today we're going to have a look at some of these kinds of people of the 17 and later years that the basis encountered. Already settled for many years in the far northern parts of the country were the Venda people. We'll see more precisely when and how they actually developed as a community in that area, where they actually came from. Just a little, often look for English word, somebody help me for moedswillig. Moedswillig.
Intentional.
Well, intentional with a little bit of what we used to call stirring, you know, a little bit.
Which is courage.
Yeah.
Which is courage. So
It's a bit of a nasty.
Well, it's a touch of nastiness, but it's not such a harsh word. Anyway,
forceful, perhaps.
yeah, raising the issue, bringing it to the fore. The Venda people, our president, Cyril Ramaphosa's people, actually crossed what became the...
Determined.
Not yet. Crossed what is now the boundary, the northern part of our country, into South Africa from what used to be Rhodesia, before it wasn't even Rhodesia, and then Zimbabwe. The Venda people, the president's people, came into South Africa after Van Riebeeck actually had been here already. Just a little moedswilligheid, just to mention this in terms of some of the sweeping statements that politicians are inclined to make, almost in terms of first come, first serve. And we'll get to land claim and the issue of land claim as far as the basis are concerned tomorrow as well. If first come, first claim was a principle that applied and could be applied, then the Mohawk Indians would own New York City. And everybody, all those millions of New Yorkers would have to evacuate, and the Mohawk descendants would move into what is now that little town.
Can I ask you, aren't the Venda supposed to be one of the lost tribes of Israel?
In that area, resident among the Venda people are the Lemba people. Lemba, often in records referred to as the Black Jews. And the student from University of South Africa did a PhD on the Lemba. And it finally determined, yes, they do have a connection up there. People thought this is superficial. The fancy people talk about phenotypic. We spoke about genetics of it. Genotypic is what your genome fingerprint is. Phenotypic is what you look like. And that's often not the confirmation of who you are. But they were dark skinned, but they seemed to have whatever stereotypic Jewish look about them. Or they said, well, these people are Black Jews. They are. They have that origin from right up north in the Israel area. The Lemba people amongst the Venda people. And they still have this almost the exclusivity identity within that area. Lemba. Incidentally, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Makhado, the missionaries, the Boers and the British. Now, I said we're going to look at the dynamic. Base versus, and this I use also, base, the bases versus other people in South Africa, and particularly in the north. Makhado was called the Lion of the North. He was the chief of the Venda people as of 1864. Lion of the North, he was quite, if one can be objective, quite an active chief. Some say bloodthirsty. There's an issue about the town of Utrecht being named Makhado, but because the record shows that Makhado was actually attacked and marauded Venda people, his own people, depending on whether he had their total support or seemingly were in opposition to him. So he's not, the name is not totally accepted by local people because of this history of Makhado. He was, at any rate, the 8th ruler of Venda, of that dynasty, and they originated, look at this date, in 1650, and the Chulume in present-day Zimbabwe. In more or less 1710, Dimbayeka led these people south and crossed into what is South Africa today for the first time. They came from the north. As did many of the black communities of South Africa, because even the Xhosa people who geographically were quite far south, the Eastern Cape, as you know, originally these people came from the north somewhere, mainly from the Great Lakes area, and migrated into this country. So if we're back to the first come, first served kind of principle, then we must look at the Bushmen and the Khoi of this country. The Bushmen had always been here. They developed from the late Stone Age people. That's been proven and confirmed by various disciplines. And then 2,000 years ago, the Khoi, the cattle keepers, the pastoral people came down from the north as well, northeast Africa, with cattle. They didn't become cattle keepers down there. They came and migrated south. But when they arrived 2,000 years ago, they found the Bushmen here already and interacted with them, not always peacefully. And then after that, about 700 years later only, some of the black community started crossing into South Africa from the north. So, and certainly Europeans are, can we show them Johnny, what's the equivalent of Johnny come lately? Susie come lately or something? They latecomers. But so are the blacks of this country, relatively speaking, which some people are not aware of, I don't think.
About the Zulus.
Is there a volume? Sorry?
What about the Zulus?
The Zulu? Yes. The Zulu, the Xhosa. Sorry, I thought you had a sound problem. The Xhosa, the Zulu, who are slightly further north, still on the east coast in what used to be called Zululand. And then the Swazi, in Eswatini, it used to be Swaziland. And the Ndebele, Matabele, Ndebele of the northern areas of Gauteng. Those four are called the Nguni people. So when I'm talking about Xhosa migrating south from Great Lakes, I'm talking about the Zulu as well, I'm talking about the Swazi as well. They are a category of people speaking mutually intelligible. If you speak Siswati or you speak Zulu or Xhosa, the other people can understand you, but they are distinct, the four languages and the four groups to an extent, but they belong to the general group. Nguni came from the north. So ditto Zulu.
Can I just ask if I understand correctly? The Khoi, have I got the name right?
No.
Khoi.
You've got Khoi, Khoin. It is Khoe, Khoen, Khoen.
They were,
Sorry to be a little technical.
thank you. They would be a totally separate tribe, if I can use the old language, coming down. And the San was there already.
Yes.
And then they intermarried.
They met up, and again there's is final archaeological, paleontological, genetic confirmation of what I'm saying in roughly what would be northern Botswana now. As they migrated south, they met the first Bushmen and interacted with them, including what you say, literally intermarried. There's no such marriage system, but they produced then. And the Coenraad, the Click language of the Coenraad, they obtained from the Bushman people. They're the original Click-speaking people. As did the Xhosa, incidentally. The clicks of the Xhosa, they're basically feet like the C-U-Q and the exit. Came from the Bushman, came from the Coenraad, got it from the Bushman, and so on.
Thank you.
Yep. I'm not going to go into detail there, but just look at the sequence, the chronology there of rulers of Venda. It's a dynasty in every sense of the word. And if you travel in those parts today, they've been acknowledged more now, archaeologically speaking otherwise. They had ruins comparable to Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe ruins. I don't have a very impressive illustration. This is just a member of the public. You can see some of the stone structures that have been, they've started excavating and reconstructing that. You can have a look at that diagram and the presence of those early Zata people. The stone evidence, stone structure evidence is still all over the place. And there's now an impressive museum at the Zata Museum, and they are reconstructing these stone structures. A very extensive, impressive, maybe I could even use the word palace, and the presence of a large community in these early days. And the descendants of, and the rulers of, these people were there. And the base people obviously met up with them and interacted with them as well. Makhado played a very, very important role eventually in the lives of the voortrekkers. You remember Soutpansberg, we're going to have a closer look at that just now as well. Thohoyandou, one of those early leaders, that name might ring a little bell. Yeah. The capital of the Venda area is Thohoyandou, in fact now. And at one stage in the earlier dispensation, when it was legislated that the different communities, black communities of South Africa, should be independent states, you remember, homelands or Bantustans. Venda was also designated, and they gave the capital to Thohoyandou, which the local people are happy about, because he was a very eminent ruler of theirs, and they all know about Thohoyandou. But there is still that town, the capital of that area. As we go down that genealogy that I showed previously, we end up with Mpefu, who became their ruler, most recent of their rulers, a line of Mpefus all the way down from the Zata dynasty. And Mpefu became a prime minister of that independent state under the previous government, the Republic of Venda, and Prime Minister Mpefu. And interestingly enough, by far the majority of the people at that time actually supported him and supported the fact that they were now independent from South Africa, or seemingly independent of South Africa. I don't know what our present president would say about that, because he would not qualify then to be president of us in this country.
So did the same people correct up in Buysdorp? Were they different? That a different thing?
They also were involved in that. But Matabele is actually more directly related and because of Zimbabwe, Greater Zimbabwe. Matabele, yes, that's
And in the north of the Shashi River, about the circle, there are some also stone ruins up there.
Yes. Partly it's difficult if we don't look at the map and the exact locations we're talking about. For me now to say yes, they were certainly Venda or only with Venda. We're going back a bit in history and even prehistory, so that some other early dynasties also played a role in the dynamic of that particular area at the time. Mzilikazi, undisputed ruler of this interesting Zata empire. And in 1820, Coenraad de Buys, you see, theoretically, he and they should have met up with this, but it didn't happen because de Buys and family initially settled in the far western part of the Soutpansberg, and that's not Venda area, never was Venda area. So they didn't really meet up with them too much. And the reason why, incidentally, I think we mentioned yesterday, they did go to that area of the western Soutpansberg was because of the salt and the salt pans, and they actually worked the salt in that particular area. Now, and I'm coming back not coming back and discuss the Boer arrival as well, which is what we're doing, also the missionaries, etc. But seeing that Coenraad de Buys, and the bases were there in 1820, when the trackers, Louis Trichardt and those trackers arrived in the area, and some records still suggest this, they were seen to be the first white or European people to come into that northern area. But when they arrived, here was Coenraad de Buys, he'd been there for 12 years already. They already found the first white man, if you like, if that's an issue of importance at all, found him there. Okay, so Rassatu, the next ruler, Matabele, he had friendly relations with the trackers. Louis Trichardt, incidentally, just a little technical, you see I spelled that Trichardt, and Louis Trichardt is spelled differently, and most records also refer to Louis Trichardt. This is his proper surname, and what was spelling Trichardt. And he actually gave them, the trackers, land to settle, and that's where Soutpansberg, the foot-tracker village, was established in 1948. In general, and today, incidentally, in a sort of technical way, the bases had excellent relations. Once they moved further east and had contact with the vendor, they had good relations with these people. But sometimes there were differences of opinion, and they had to flee south, and that's where they met up with Mzilikazi. Remember our story about Buysdorp? That happened, but then they would move back and still have friendly relations with the Venda people. Then came Makhado in 1864, all the time, up to 1898. What had been happening, there was an increase in the presence of white farmers, particularly in the area. And Makhado became a little bit irritated with the situation and with due reason. And we'll see a little map now how the Europeans or the farmers were starting to move into that area and occupy land. More and more farms are further and further west and north and east and so on. So Makhado eventually led an attack, a massive attack of thousands of these warriors on Soutpansberg, and Soutpansberg had to be evacuated eventually, but we'll get back to that in 1967. Goed gedacht, and we'll get to the missionaries as well, had been established by now, but that was also burnt down by Makhado. He attacked the missionary incidentally, and some of the bases had to go and find shelter. This was the year before evacuation. They had to find shelter at Soutpansberg. They actually had a fort, a massive area within the village where they would seek shelter and protection whenever there was a problem from outside. Now, Matabele, he lived in the Soutpansberg, literally, almost in a cave with some of these people in the and terraces in mid-Soutpansberg, not to the east too much, not to the west too much. The Boers called him Katsi, that's Matabele, because they, as often happened with Europeans, couldn't really pronounce or hear a particular name properly. He tried to attack Soutpansberg a number of times, but he was repulsed, thanks to those thick walls again of the fort. This is before Makhado did the job properly, as it were. This is a map that I encountered now. This is 1875. You can see it's just after the evacuation it's using old terminology, now no longer acceptable, but fascinating information there. And already this map was constructed by a certain Marensky in England, particularly with reference to the gold and diamond fields. But the detail is so fascinating. Already on this map, a little dot indicates, and it's too small even here to see Soutpansberg or that little village. It says abandoned already on this map. So he was so meticulous, this person, in constructing this map, that he could actually draw attention to the fact that the foot trackers had left the little village. That indicates the sort of presence of the vendor, these areas, sort of heartland and main settlements of the vendor still at that time. But then the farms, the encroaching, as they saw the vendor, encroaching farms from all over the place. And this became a problem for their rulers. With due reason in many cases, because the terms under which, or the conditions under which they obtained land or occupied land, these farmers, were questionable sometimes. And you could perhaps use the word bribes. They gave short-term promises and whatever to the local people, and then occupied the land. Came for the vendor people at least worse. And then came the missionaries. Now remember Michael, he led the delegation down to Kruger to get their land, and it was he that eventually, and I see the statistic here is different to the one I gave in terms of how many wives and concubines. If I look at all my records, I should actually add what I mentioned yesterday to those 23. But 23 is impressive in itself. So let's say of 23 wives and concubines, and through his father he started reading the Bible, and then started thinking about missionaries, and let 22 of his wives and concubines go. How you do that in practical terms, I don't know. If they asked to go and live somewhere else, or you just don't pay any attention to them with all their children and all his children, I'm not sure about the practicalities. But he ended up with one important one, or one significant one. And at that time, he thought about these people, and he thought about what his father had taught him and them. And this is what he said. I'm going to read this and just paraphrase. Ek was dikwels verlangende om van Gods woord te hoor in die kerk te kom als iemand te Soutpansberg preekte. En weenende dikwels by die kerkdeur, maar het werd my nie toegelaten binne te gaan. He wished to attend church in Soutpansberg. There was a proper church, proper preacher van Warmelo, a name quite well known in the early documentation of our country, actually preached there. And he wanted to attend those services, and he would go to the church and get as far as the door, as did Gabriel, his brother, upon occasion, and they would not be allowed into the church in Soutpansberg. Yet, they rendered service on behalf of those Soutpansbergers, those foot trackers, as elephant hunters, as bearers of messages, as in Gabriel's case, for example, emissary down to Portuguese East Africa to negotiate for possible trade between the trackers and the Portuguese people of the then Eastern Portuguese colony, etc. But they never got recognition in the true sense of the word for that. So he invited, did Michael, Reverend Alexander Makhado, 1862, to minister to them in Soutpansberg. Makhado brought his wife along, and they arrived on the 18th of May 1863. And what he recorded, and this is useful about missionaries like this, they're incredible recorders. They wrote down every thought that they ever had in a day, everything that they did, everything everybody did around them all the time. So if we happen upon a record like this, it's very useful if you want to reconstruct the situation and the conditions and the context of people at a particular time. So, and there was nothing when he arrived. Not a structure, nothing. He and Mrs. Makhado lived in a kind of sticks and grass shelter for a while, but started preaching the very next morning when he woke up. He started preaching these people. He couldn't speak the language at first, and we're going to get all these challenges that missionaries had at that time. We'll talk about that just now. But he started preaching straight away.
Was he from the London Missions?
Yes, London Mission Society. Yeah. Couldn't speak a language, and environment, diet, food, disease, fever. In fact, less than a year after they arrived, Mrs. McKee died of fever, as they recorded, malaria. Less than a year that she was gone. Okay, so Goedgedag was started, and this land was donated by one of those encroaching farmers in the area. They gave them land for Goedgedag, and I happened to find this place. There's no structure anymore, but I took some of our archaeologists along, and we tramped around the bush and found the ruins, the remains of Goedgedag in that area, now on a private farm. And we had problems accessing that farm to go and find the remains of the structures of Goedgedag. Why did we have problems? Because the farmer said, you people, you researchers, you're coming to look at my land, and then they're going to expropriate without compensation. You're the sort of advance guard to come and prove that there were other people on my land before, not just me, ever. So, but yes, we found Goedgedag fascinating. And then later they moved the mission to another place we forget. So Mrs. McKee died in 1864. So the challenges, language, as I said, the climate. It was incredibly hot in summer in that area. His normal day, if that could ever be called a normal day, the kids' normal day started early in the morning with prayers for the local people. He already had problems because the bases wouldn't pray or read the Bible or anything like that with local people, being some of the Venda people there. They didn't want to share the same space with those people while praying to God, as it were. So that's those kinds of interpersonal issues he had to contend with. Early morning prayers, mid-morning schooling, afternoon schooling. His wife also did some of that when she was still alive. And then the late afternoon, evening prayers and preaching and stuff. He had an incredible day. And also the diet, of course, to find food at that stage. But he also died of fever. Just a year after, less than a year after his wife, he was gone. So now they had to find another one, but he had obtained by then an assistant, one Stephanus Hofmeyer. And this is an incredible story in itself. He eventually, he didn't write the book, that was wrong. He kept, again, a very meticulous record, and the book was published of his diaries and his daily record and stuff. And he actually spread the gospel in those areas for 40 years. McKee had, by that time, bought another farm. They were on the donated one, Goedgedag. They bought another farm called Kranspoort. And here they started erecting buildings of all kinds. You can see the young Hofmeyer on the left, and the slightly older Hofmeyer and Mrs. Hofmeyer on the right. And then you can see some of the structures built over there. Now this one doesn't exist anymore. This is where the missionary and his wife eventually stayed. That's been torn down. That wall, although very dilapidated, that church rather, still exists, and several other outbuildings, which in the times, during those 40 years, Hofmeyer actually put those things up. And just incidentally, a little South African land matter. This Kranspoort, that property with all the buildings on it, was the very first piece of land given back to the black people, as it were. The very first. The NG Kerk, the Dutch Reformed Church, eventually was in control of that mission and actually owned that property of life. And without much ado and much publication, they gave that land to the local people. Simply because a person who suggested that he was a leader of those local people came to the minister at the time and said, you know, this is our land, it's been our land forever. I'm the leader, and my people say we want the land back. And to his amazement, what the minister said after just a day or two of meeting with us, you can have the land. And he didn't know what to do with it. And here's this is an absolute fact. He never ever came back to that land. He went back to the area that he had been living in before. And if you go to Kranspoort today, you'll see a rather sad state of affairs. Buildings are falling apart. There were even sports fields eventually for recreation purposes, etc., etc., etc. There's still a graveyard though at Kramspoort, overgrown, but this is where Hofmeyer and Makhado, the Makhids are buried today. There you are on the left, Makhado and the Hofmeyers, and the effect that Hofmeyer particularly had in his interaction with the bases was that in greater numbers, at first they were divided the bases. They wouldn't attend these sessions by the missionaries. They didn't agree always with what Michael was trying to effect in there, but eventually they did in large numbers. And in this picture, not very distinct, it's only the first time now that we are accessing actual photographs, not stylized diagrams or pictures or sketches of leaders and people of the time. We now have photographs. But the father of one of the present bases, no, the grandfather of one of the present bases is actually on that picture and became a lay preacher. And his grandson is a leader amongst the contemporary bases and still a very religious man and also a kind of a lay preacher. And through all of this, this resulted, the first church was eventually built in Buysdorp, which is only a few kilometers from where Kramspoort, the last mission station, is situated. We'll look at a little map just so you can orientate yourself a little bit geographically. Okay, and then the Boers. Preller managed to find, are we still doing right with this? A good record of the diary of Tregard, also spelled with Tregard. And when they arrived, he recorded. Tregard was happily one of those diarists that recorded quite meticulously. Not only do we find when they arrived and how the village developed, why they built the village there, who the leaders were at the time, but on every other page almost, you find Gabriel base, Michael base, you find Tregard recording the fact that the bases were in the village and that the bases were doing all kinds of things for them on their behalf. So there was quite intensive interaction between the bases at that time with the Schoeman people. That's an actual excerpt from Tregard's diary. And just imagine having to decipher that and then develop that little book that I showed you now. Thanks to Preller, he did that on our behalf. I've actually seen that and worked with that, and it's get a headache within 20 minutes if you look at those things. Okay, so that kind of interaction with the basis, Gabriel and Michael acted as guides, interpreters, messengers, for example, as I mentioned, Gabriel to Delaware Bay, wagon drivers, elephant hunters, and the rest, but were not allowed into the church. And still, the Boers. There's the village, people who lived there. And there were interviews with them actually living still, but having moved to town, Tregard at the time. Some of those people who lived there made sketches of the place. And these records are available to us now, quite happily. His Potgieter was the founder of that dorp, first called the Oude Dorp or Soutpansberg Dorp, and eventually it was named after this commandant, the General Stephanus Schoeman. They called him the Stormvoël van die Noorde, a stormy petrel. Quite a while ago. And imagine dealing with Schoeman on the one hand and Makhado on the other hand. I mean, you're just looking for trouble, and that certainly happened. So first Oude Dorp, Soutpansberg Dorp, it was named after him in 1858. And that church was actually there. And you could see the rampart on that sketch in the middle there, even cannon placings on the corners. So that's where the entire village would jump into trouble originally with the missionaries and some farmers of the surrounding area. They would all gather in that place of safety. So here we are back to Makhado now, and increasing instability in that area. He constantly attacked farmers. And the missionary off-man bases would have to seek refuge, as I said, in Schoemansdal fort or rampart. And eventually, despite a commando assistant from Pretoria, and this is what the Schoemansdalers asked, said, please come and help us, this is really getting uncomfortable up here, the men are attacking us all the time. Makhado was successful with a very large force, I think of about 4,000 men, and Schoemansdal was then evacuated on the 15th of July, 1867. Yes, sir.
What sort of weapons would they have had, the Makhado warriors?
Yeah, you'd think assegai and stabbing spears and shields and stuff. Yes, they had that. But the Boers and the Schoemansdalers had increasingly been using them, sitting at home, the Schoemansdalers, and using them to go out and find ivory, to hunt elephant. And how did they go and find elephant? They gave them rifles, and the men didn't give the rifles back to them. So they were well armed when they eventually effectively attacked Schoemansdal. Not only with their shields and assegais, but also with voorleiers. So that's where the fort was effective, but only up to a point. Now this, I'm not an archaeologist, but eventually we had an archaeologist from our department excavating the site of Schoemansdal. And just as, by the way, maybe you also find it interesting. And after he'd done the basic work, and as recently as just 2-3 years ago, one of our colleagues who had studied at UCLA, also an archaeologist, but a historical archaeologist, went back there as recently as just a few years ago. She now has obtained a PhD and again excavated and analyzed. And it's fascinating, the community that was established in those early years there by these fur trappers. It was quite a sophisticated village, and the reconstruction is even more exciting. If ever you travel up as far as Makhado or Mzilikazi, turn left, travel towards the west, and you'll see Schoemansdal. There's a museum there as well. Many of the artifacts that these archaeologists found are on display. Beautiful picture of Makhado as well, and of Schoeman and Potgieter and all of those. There's actually still a cemetery, a graveyard of those early fur trackers very close to this museum. And then you can see this reconstruction. You can actually walk on the site and see what they found there. Just look at this. There's the rampart. You saw the sketch that then below is the Powder magazine or store on the left-hand side. And these are from sketches of the locals at that time. Houses allocated, the whole thing. And the archaeologists didn't excavate for some of the evidence they found. They didn't even have to excavate. Some of the hedges, the perimeter hedges are still there, but growing wild, in rows, neat rows. And you dig just a meter or so, and here you start finding the streets, you start finding the foundations of the old church, you're finding the foundations of the fort or the rampart. You can see the cannon placings in the two corners. It's all there. So it's amazing in a sense what those people managed to do in those early years. 1855, that's sketched. Reconstruction or restoration, if you like, of Schoemansdal. Guess what? It's still, yet the diary says, we didn't really drink, went to church. This was the kind of community that we were. We are Schoemansdalers, we don't do that sort of thing. We find the remains of the still. And incidentally, looking very carefully at that diary, that scribble of Schoeman, and you look at the day that should be a Sunday according to the date, and you see that he's doing this, he's doing that, he's doing everything else, but no, not once, this meticulous recorder, not once says, this morning I went to church, or met young and puss at the church in front of us, we discussed tomorrow's hunting trip. Never a mention of that. And yes, oven, cookout, shelter, reconstructed interior of that little village now. All for anybody to see who visits that area. And then the Boers. Still, now, this is what Hofmeyer wrote on behalf of the bases. Basically what, and it's not the only letter to the Transvaalse Republiek or the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek in Pretoria, they were classified, as you can see by that first item, by that government as natives. and the kind of discrimination that was applied to them. Yet they used the bases as surrogate chiefs over tribes. They had to be tax collectors on behalf of the government because the bases had better or easy access to the local people. So they had to go from what they called then tribe to tribe and hut to hut and said the government says you owe us so much per month because you're living under their jurisdiction or whatever the case may be. And this the bases did. But yet they discriminated to them because of the legislation classifying them as natives. Now, many such letters, as I say, have been written, and some of the bases already, and even Coenraad de Buys, I don't think, can't remember whether any of our depictions of Buys included his signature, but we'll see it subsequently. Coenraad he must have had some education, he must have had some schooling. He could actually sign his name with a few words attached to it, and many of the bases by now were also literate enough to sign, but several of these bases on a letter like this were just put across. Thumbprints hadn't been invented at that stage, so they just put across. So they kindly asked the Burgerrechten for burger citizen rights and said, note the priorities here. They should be able or allowed to buy ammunition. And the salt pans, in a sense, had been taken away from us. Said, please can we work the salt pans again? And the reasons being, our father Coenraad was a free white man. We have turned our backs on heathendom and black customs. Neither of those very true, or absolutely true. Because black customs they had around burial, for example, and I have to admit, even now, even a few years ago, there's some touches of what I had experienced in other communities around burying an individual there that you wouldn't normally find with children of a free white man, in that sense of the word. As far as turning our backs on heathendom, well, it's a normal community basis. They were then and they still are. And we do comply with citizenship duties and taxes, although they're much like their father or grandfather, Coenraad de Buys, and reneged on payments here, there, and everywhere at one stage. Anyway, so they did get a positive response eventually, as we said before, in 1888, when Michael took a delegation down to Pretoria. This visit and interaction reacted in land being granted up in the Soutpansberg 4 farms, and we look at them eventually. Okay, so Makhado still kept attacking, but then when Pefu, this is not the most recent Pefu, when Pefu took over, he also fiercely defended Bender's independence, but eventually, with help from Pretoria, 4,000 men finally defeated him in 1898. That was the end of this dynasty of Bender in the true sense of the word. And that particular Pefu fled across the Limpopo to the north. And the British. Now, the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republic, the Transvaal Republic, had been annexed by Britain in 1877. And then the Transvaal won back its independence in 1881. And under both administrations, the bases were under draconian kind of legislation. Both administrations or governments, if you like, discriminated against the bases and other so-called matters as well. When the Second Anglo-Boer War broke out in 1899, the bases, although they never saw active duty, assisted the Boers in many ways, as they had done in the First Anglo-Boer War. Remember, there were 2 Anglo-Boer wars. In some records, the Eerste Vryheidsoorlog and the Tweede Vryheidsoorlog. First War for Freedom and the second one, otherwise called the Anglo-Boer War. But more accurately today, the commentators say it's the South African War, because of so many other people, so many other South Africans being drawn into that particular war. And we will discuss this at another session on Saturday on Anglo-Boer War. So at Petersburg, Polokwane, you turn left before you actually get to the town, and here you reach a site which was a concentration camp that the British set up for Boer wives and children and older men. It was set up a little bit later than most of the concentration camps, and there were very many all over the country at that time. In 1900 or 1901, not in 1899 already. And for their involvement, their assistance as the British saw their activities, they were also, the bases were interned in the Petersburg or Polokwane concentration camp. But, interestingly, well, they were forced to go into this camp. They were not given tents, they weren't given any accommodation. They were given half rations because they were classified as natives. They weren't just Boers and Boer families. So many of them stayed in, they had wagons by this time, the bases did. And that's how they arrived at the concentration camp. And they lived in their wagons or under the wagons for that couple of years. And another interesting point, the British didn't allow them to become part of the main camp. They had to be separate. Talk about apartheid. Even in the concentration camp, and even the British put the bases to one side. They couldn't be amongst the Boers. So another interesting visit. There you see the names of the bases. There's now a monument, commemoration of many things. Eventually 158 bases were interned in that particular camp. There were 47 men, which is quite a large number for compared to other areas in South Africa. 56 women. Well, maybe the men, I think, understanding a little bit of it myself now, they weren't active participants in the war, but they seemed to be assisting the Boers, so they put the men on. They weren't actually fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Boers at the time. 55 children, and a total of 12 died in the camp, and I managed to get the names of them and how old they were, from 2 months old to 18 years old. That's the spectrum of ages of the bases who died in that concentration camp.
Where do you see the concentration camp?
It used to be an industrial area of Polokwane, Petersburg, southwest of it, but Polokwane is expanded to the extent it's within Polokwane now, but still the more or less industrial area. If you drive into Petersburg, Polokwane, and you turn left to sort of bypass the town to go up north, as you turn left, you'll see a sign saying concentration camp. And this is what you'll see there, the graves, rows of graves all over the place. Eventually, in this camp, and you can see there's 1901, it was still very late, or rather late in terms of other concentration camps during